And at 10, moisture sensitive. One of the things that I find to be the absolute dumbest thing about not only these damned suits, but also the FNAF series in general, is how stupid it is that the spring lock mechanisms inside the spring lock suits fail with moisture. Sure, it explains why William gets spring locked because the room was dripping and whatever, the ceiling was leaking, and it makes everyone confused with Crying Child because he was crying. Despite that not being a spring lock failure, everyone thought it was because he was crying and, you know, moisture. But in actual practice, that is a horribly flawed mechanic. Like, if me breathing and sweating is going to make the metal bits snap on me, why would I do it in a hot robotic suit? That seems like a horrible and stupid idea. Like, yes, okay, put me in a hot and sweaty environment that gets me killed if it gets wet. That's not a liability at all. I get sweaty wearing my freaking Doctor Strange costume, okay? Imagine a giant suit full of metal, okay? That would also be heavy as hell to walk around in too, only making the sweating worse. In at 9, designer. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these spring lock suits were made with pure intentions. By William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that's not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made, and considering the abilities of Baby and her comrades, we know that they were made in order to kill, meaning that even if the spring lock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to assume that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. But honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the spring locks, you get me? And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal, bars, cogs, gears, and chains and more into the same space as your body would be made with pure intentions, you should stop watching these videos and go to a therapist. Seriously. I have a number. In at 8, no bonus. The spring lock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way enough for a human to fit inside is nuts. And while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers or miles, whatever, per hour in huge metal death boxes, so we can't necessarily complain about it. And while yes, they have their faults, there is nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and suit. That's an incredible feat of technology, and I'm sure they play into it with the marketing. Like, I mean, we hear the Foam Guy tapes from FNAF 3 talking about these things, okay? And he never mentions a bonus or anything like that for you risking your life with one of these damn suits. And even if you end up getting spring locked, there doesn't really seem to be any compensation package for your loved ones. Hell, if you die, you may not even get your severance. Actually, maybe that's why they do it. Your family can file a lawsuit since, you know, you died on the job, but that's a lengthy court battle against a massive company with a serial killer who has yet to be caught at the front lines. It's not really gonna do much good for your fam. So the fact that you don't get a bonus if you get in one of these suits, let alone get spring locked, no thanks. It's a red flag. Swipe left. And at 7, Kelsey. The New Kid from 1:35 AM is a story from Third Fazbear Frights book. The story revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts. They aren't really popular, you know, they aren't cool. But when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they try to make a new friend. Despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone in the school, over time Devin grows jealous of Kelsey, because, you know, he's adored and loved by everyone in the school. So, in an act of revenge, or to maybe try to gain control over him, Devin hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a spring lock suit for a few hours. I guess to try to humble him, I guess? I don't know why you thought that this would be a good thing, but obviously the plan goes horribly wrong because it's a FNAF book. After getting in the suit, the spring locks ended up failing, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, causing all of the blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pool around the ground. Devin and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but then something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime to make sure Kelsey's body is still there. He sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth because he doesn't think about fingerprints, and snap. The spring locks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devin gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out. But not before seeing a body in the suit, with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. I don't know, okay? Could this be a character that we have yet to see in the games? Probably not. It's just a character in the book, alright? This doesn't happen in the games, okay? It's a myth. This is just a book thing, okay? Stop. And it's 6, unintentional. You see, there are a decent amount of people that for some reason think that these spring-lock suits were made with pure intentions by William Afton. This kind of goes hand in hand with the idea that William started killing after losing his kids, but we know that that is not the case. Since thanks to the fast facts found in FNAF AR's files, we know that the Funtime animatronics were some of the first ones ever made. And considering the abilities of Baby, at the very least, we know that these were made in order to kill. We know that that was a thought in his brain, meaning that even if the Springlock animatronics were the very first animatronics ever, it's reasonable to think that they were also designed with death in mind, which explains multiple things. More on one of them in a minute, but honestly, if William made the Funtimes with death in mind, it's likely that he did the same with the Springlocks. And if you think that a suit that can snap at a moment's notice and shove pounds of metal bars, cogs, gears, and more into the same place your body would take up, was made with pure intentions, then you need therapy more than I do, okay? I have some numbers you can call. Especially when a normal animatronic and then a suit for your employees would be cheaper and less likely the focus of a lawsuit. Speaking of which, halfway through into number 5, liability. The spring lock mechanism is probably the most intuitive thing that FNAF's world invented. The ability to move robotic parts out of the way with enough room for a human to fit inside is insane, and while it may be dangerous, we also drive over 100 kilometers an hour in huge giant metal death boxes, so maybe we can't really complain. While yes, they do have their faults, there's nothing compared to the ability to be both animatronic and human suit. It's an incredible feat of technology, even if just absolutely the dumbest idea ever. Because it's terrifying for the same reasons that it would be in game. Someone can dress in it and pretend to be a robot, okay? It can clamp down on you at any second, and it has done so multiple times before. The spring-lock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they did not need to end up creating, but like, I don't know, like these things are so hella deadly. Why would both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them? Especially Henry, like goddamn. Just make a separate suit for the animatronic, okay? Like make a separate suit that your employee can wear. It's the employees, the people who run your business. They make you money, so you know they don't end up dying from robotic bits replacing their normal human organic bits in a hot suit that fails when it gets moist. Sweat, breathing. Yeah, I would never get in one of those things. Even if there hadn't been an incident before, okay, that just seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen. And I don't want to be the one whose family sues because I'm too dead to do it myself, alright? So, no. It's a myth that they shouldn't have gotten sued. Paperwork. One of the worst things for the survivors after a springlock failure has to be the paperwork that is associated with it, because goddamn. Someone dying in your building is one thing. Someone dying in your building because of something in your building is another. And then add on to that the fact that they were your employee and probably forced into that suit without because of their contract, and you'll be filing reports until you have to retire. Okay, especially because one mistake on those papers means even more paperwork, and I don't really know anyone who likes to do paperwork. Personally, I hate it, but that's also because my ADHD makes me it makes it unbearable for me, honestly. It's even tough to write scripts sometimes, but I mean, eventually I have to, but that's where my brain thrives, in that stressful environment, which is not good for my health. But if it was that kind of paperwork, I would honestly just quit, because there was no way in hell that I would even want to attempt to keep my focus on that when I can just scroll through TikTok or YouTube instead. So yeah, no thanks. But ultimately into number 2, replaced. Oh yeah, don't forget your bones being replaced with metal ones. Yeah, sure, there's surgery for people who need repairs or replacements, okay? I think hip replacements are probably the most common actually. However, those have whole processes behind them to ensure a fast recovery and survival. Not being infected, all of a sudden being shoved full of metal bones where normal ones used to be, that's a guaranteed infection at the very least, especially considering how, your normal bones have to go somewhere else. And whether they're just crushed and then spread out inside you or just pushed out the other side, you're going to be in a hell of a lot of pain. Plus, probably not alive, which I guess is a good thing. since you won't really have to deal with the intense pain for too long, hopefully. But this actually makes me think, if you replace all of your bones with metal ones, are you still you? Is this like a Ship of Theseus moment? Am I about to have like a WandaVision finale? Or like, are we just our brain? And if we are our brain, does that mean that if we have a brain transplant, do we become another person despite it still being my body? And does that mean that we're just like a brain piloting a bone mech with meat armor? Oh no, existential crisis! And finally, in at number 1, death. I mean, don't get me wrong, okay? But the worst thing about a spring-lock failure has to be the whole death part, right? Ignore my mumbling. I mean, honestly, okay, it's obviously not for some of you, given the whole comments thing earlier, but the only reason you wouldn't die in a spring-lock suit is because you're a main character and need to be around for the story. And then you're just in agonizing pain for the rest of your life. Yeah, the only people who have survived a spring-lock failure, well, confirmed, is William. So, yeah, and you know, he's like the main antagonist of the game and was only able to survive since the spirit of a victim was keeping him alive. And in the books, William also ended up getting spring-locked before, but then got out of the suit, since Dave Miller, who was revealed to be William, has scars from a previous spring-lock failure from before he becomes Springtrap in the books. So the only one who can ever really survive seems to be William, and he's survived it twice. Anyone else is boned, and personally, I'd rather not die by having millions of small metal bits and several dozen large ones shoved into my body, trying to replace my body. I would rather die peacefully in my sleep with Chica's hand around my throat.
Number 10. Spring-lock doors. Something that has come up multiple times over the course of all of these games, a question that still has yet to be answered, is how do the doors open if the power turns off, considering that they're mechanical doors? Well, what if the doors are actually spring-loaded and it's the power that holds them in place, and then when they turn off, they just snap upwards, I guess. The other strange thing in general about the doors is that they slide upwards, not sideways. That just means those straight looking sheets of metal are actually able to curl up somehow, being stored in the ceiling, like a garage door, although I don't think that's what's happening, or that there is a wall directly above for that door to slide into, which would be a lot of convenient wall stacking, especially if this is a one-level building, then it really doesn't make sense. Either way, I can only imagine that these doors would even be capable of springing open if it was the power alone keeping them shut, and that they are somehow spring-loaded to always be open, unless the power is on to push them down. That's the only way we can rationalize the way they work. Maybe this is also why our power runs out so fast as well. After all, I'm assuming it would take quite a bit of force and therefore power to keep them in place if they were spring-loaded. Number 8. Plush Trap is from Sister Location, and what's more, might also be an older model spring-lock suit? Based on what Circus Baby says about the spring-lock suit we are stuck in coming from her old location, we could theorize that Plush Trap is also a Sister Location spring-lock suit, especially since Plush Trap looks much older by comparison. But why do we think Plush Trap is also a spring-lock suit? Well, it's interesting that in the book Fetch, we learn more about the Plush Trap animatronic, where it is implied that it can mimic the voices of other folks, something that prior to Fetch's release, only Sister Location animatronics seem to be capable of. This is what makes us think that Plush Trap comes from Sister Location and perhaps was an older animatronic brought over from Circus Baby's previous location. While Plush Trap doesn't really fit in with the overall aesthetic of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, we do know that an older spring-lock suit was also kept there. Does that mean that Plush Trap is also an old spring-lock that initially was its sister location, just based on the voice mimicking? If so, how did they get to be with the Nightmare animatronics? And also, who wore the Plush Trap suits if they were ever worn, if they were spring-locks in that way? Was it designed for a shorter employee or possibly for kids to wear? Also, just to be clear, I'm not implying that that is the spring-lock suit that we are in Sister Location when you're playing the game, because yeah, I don't know how tall Michael Afton is, but I don't think he's as small as Plush Trap.
And it's 7 required. The spring-lock suits themselves are an occupational hazard that they didn't really need to create. Like, these things are hella deadly, and both William and Henry allow for their employees to wear them. Like, goddamn, okay? Just make a separate suit for the animatronic characters, for the employees, okay? Like, the people who run your business. You know, they are the ones who make you the money, so you know, they don't end up dying from robotic parts replacing their internal organs. OSHA would have been all over these goddamn suits if it was real in this universe, but apparently I guess it's not. And honestly, it's probably required by your contract to wear these suits at work, and if you refuse, you're probably gonna get fired, especially considering how they started getting ready to fire Jeremy because he saw Glitch Trap in Help Wanted. So why wouldn't they fire you for not wearing your suit if it's in your contract? Even if you claim it was to protect your life, they'd find another reason that you couldn't really fight against, so especially, you know, when a serial killer is the CEO. And its 6 implications. Now, while the term spring lock is used in real life, it's totally different from the actual FNAF mechanism. I'm certain most of you got the whole spring locks are real line from Spring Locks and You, How Not to Die Remastered. It's a thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual spring locks are just locks that use springs, okay? From my research, what I gathered is that a spring lock in real life is, in simplest terms, a spring lock. It's like if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks or just ends up bringing you back or quotes this page, so it's kind of circular logic, okay? You can't use evidence within the thing that you're trying to prove as proof that it is real. It's like plugging a power bar into itself. It doesn't work. You can't use the same article to prove that spring locks are real, okay? Because they're not. At least their game form isn't. But if the spring lock failure was real, I think the implications of like all of this being real in general is like one of the worst things. You get it? Like it's definitely in the top 10. Get it? It's a little meta content joke for you because this is a top 10 list. It's in the top 10. Halfway through into number 5, comments. I've mentioned this in previous videos, mostly to explain why there won't ever be an actual real FNAF restaurant that you'll be able to walk into, and it still remains true since we're only getting a virtual diner that you can only order online. However, I think that one of the worst things still, and especially when it comes to these suits, is the goddamn comments about them. You want to know a comment that I saw yesterday? Well, yesterday for me as I was writing this, Wednesday for you. Okay, I saw someone say that they want to be spring locked. What? Why? Why would you want to be spring locked? Do you know how messed up that is? You're saying that you want to be killed by this thing? Because there's some hotlines that you should call. Like, why on sweet heaven's earth would you want to be spring locked? Do you know how absolutely agonizingly painful that would be? That would be one of the worst things imaginable, okay? Holy sweet Lord baby Jesus W. Christ. That would be one of the worst ways to go, if not the worst way. At least like as far as like actually could happen goes, I think at least, okay? Because like a volcano would suck, but it's a bit unrealistic. It's a bad idea, okay? Stop doing this. Stop saying this. Okay, talk to a doctor.
Number 3, Funtime Bonnie is a spring lock suit. Funtime Bonnie really only appears in Sister Location as an empty head. But what if there is something else going on with this animatronic? After all, there is one animatronic who we also don't get a good look at in the game, but who we are pretty familiar with by the end of it, just based on our experiences. That would be the spring lock animatronic that we are stuck in temporarily. While we never see it explicitly, we also never get to see Funtime Bonnie explicitly either. This has led some to theorize that Funtime Bonnie is said spring lock suit and is the older animatronic that Circus Baby was referring to. The only thing that seems odd is how new we'd imagine Funtime Bonnie to look, but then again, it's more likely that the animatronics at Sister Location are actually really old and have just been well maintained and possibly refurbished, and possibly, you know, hidden away there. After all, Circus Baby's Pizza World seems to be one of the first locations, I think. This timeline is hard to keep track of, so forgive me if I'm wrong about something that has not actually been confirmed, so I guess we can't really be wrong about much. Number 2, spring lock suits were designed to malfunction. You have to wonder when you learn how easy it is for a suit to malfunction, if the suits themselves were ever actually made with the intention of functioning in a safe manner. It seems more likely that they were made with the intention to do harm. The spring locks can malfunction if not wound up securely and properly before the wearer dons the suit. Not winding up the springs properly can result in them simply going back to their original position, impaling the wearer. The thing that I find very suspicious is how a small amount of moisture, such as that which comes from heavy breathing or even just moisture in the air, can cause the spring locks to completely loosen. These are also suits that you'd think were intended for you to move around in, acting as the character you were dressed up as, and yet in Sister Location we are warned not to move too much as this can actually set off the spring locks, implying either the locks were not at all secure when the suit was put on us, or that they are so temperamental that basic movements could set them off, never mind jumping around, dancing, or in general performing as the character that you happen to be dressed as, which is what I'd assume would be expected normally of an employee donning a mascot suit.
In at 10, Devin. The story, The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the third Fazbear Frights book, revolves around Devin, Mick, and Kelsey. Devin and Mick are outcasts from their class, and they aren't really popular. You know, they aren't cool. But when the new kid Kelsey arrives, they try to make a new friend. despite Kelsey being incredibly charismatic and adored by everyone in the school. Over time, Devin grows jealous of Kelsey since, he has everything that he wants, so in an act of revenge or in an effort to gain control, Devin hatches a plan to lure him to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's and trap him in a spring-lock suit for a couple hours. To try and maybe humble him, I guess. I don't know what the plan was here, but the plan, whatever it ended up being, goes incredibly wrong. After getting in the spring-lock suit, it fails, as expected, because it's a FNAF book, causing blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic, and you know what happens when a spring lock fails. So yeah. Devin and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so they won't get in trouble, but something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devin returns to the scene of the crime like the idiot that he is, sticks his hand in the animatronic's mouth to try to find a body, and snap. The spring locks fail yet again because for some reason someone reset them, and as per usual, Devin gets his hand stuck inside the machine and bleeds out, but not before seeing black hair in the suit. Instead of blonde hair. Would you want to be spring locked? Hopefully you said no, but whatever you answered, the opposite will happen unless you like this video, okay? You got 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3. Thank you. See, there you go. Now you will either be spared or not, depending on your life choices and probably previous trauma. Let's keep going. In at 9, you. Spoiler alert for a fan game, but if I say which fan game, it will spoil it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, skip to the next number, okay? I'll give you a chance to do that. Alright, now that you've prepared for the spoilers, A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by Fiznom on Game Jolt. It was released on the 25th of April 2018, and it was made by the same guy who's currently working on FNAF Plus, so it's going to be good. The gameplay of A Shadow Over Freddy's is a hybrid between a traditional point and click and a free-roaming horror game, so you click and it's flat. The player ends up waking up to find themselves with no memories and a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza and is tasked with surviving the 5 nights. The player is given different tasks and then you have to complete them before 6 AM and then getting out of the establishment. However, the ending of the game has you getting trapped in a spring-lock suit and being left to rot, meaning that you're a spring-lock victim, and I don't like that, so yeah, number 9.
Number 6, Shadow Freddy and RWQFSFASXC. I think I said that all right. This theory, I believe, has been debunked, so just a word to the wise about that, but I still thought it was a pretty cool theory that existed, and I personally like the sound of it. I think it's a neat theory, hence why I'm gonna share it here with you, even though it's been discredited. But just know, we know that. The theory posits that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie were both victims of a spring lock failure. Phone Guy talks about the sister location experiencing multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, leading some fans to think that might explain the shadow animatronics we see and what exactly they are. Spirits who are attached to the suits that they died in, but were for some reason unable to fully possess them, instead becoming a shadow-like version of that animatronic. I just think it's a cool idea. I mean, shadow animatronics are so mysterious to me, so when I find cool stories that could explain how they work, their theories, I love them. Number 5, Yellow Suit. In FNAF 2 on night 6, Phone Guy's call reveals that he is surprised you came into work at the location, as it is meant to be shut down for a while. He tells you that there was an incident that happened involving the yellow suit in the back, which many have theorized to be the spring-lock suit used in the missing children incident, where 5 victims went missing. Some even think that this phone call is referring to that incident. Phone Guy claims that someone wore the yellow suit, and ever since, the animatronics have been acting strangely. Is it because they had victims stuffed into them, and possibly because those victims' souls are making the animatronics behave more aggressively because they're possessing them? I don't know, but it makes sense. Number 4, Bite of 83. We know that Fredbear was the one behind the Bite of 83 based on the minigames we see in FNAF 4, and we also know that CC was the victim of said bite and eventually died of his injuries. But what we don't know is why the bite happened. However, if you look deep into the lore surrounding spring locks, it feels like a no-brainer here. Sorry, no pun intended, crying child. Sorry about that. We already know that spring lock failures have pretty much been an ongoing problem since the creation of the suits, and we also know that spring lock failures on a massive scale eventually got these kinds of suits retired. So what if the Bite of 83 was the major beginning of that? What if the bite happened because of a spring lock failure itself? All the clues seem to be pointing us in this direction. A technical issue is the only real explanation, as the animatronics themselves seem to have not been inherently malicious, not until they were bonded with spirits which lingered inside them, making them vengeful. And so if there wasn't a spirit in there, then we must assume there was a technical error, a spring lock malfunction.
Getting close to the end, in number 3, Garvey. A psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras for Domitibus, okay? The game from which he is the penultimate antagonist of. As a human, he was the man who killed the missing children and then later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burned to a permanent death in the Fazbear Frights fire, which is where the two timelines start to separate. Garvey is a more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3, obviously. However, it's not actually William Afton, since the game was released before the name reveal and even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to freaking call it. He crawls on all fours and uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demon spider monkey from the deepest pits of hell that Satan didn't sanction the creation of. Like, Jesus Christ, I don't understand how this thing wants to operate, but honestly, I don't want to know, okay? This creation is a monstrosity that haunts my nightmares, and it's haunting my nightmares even more so than all my actual real world trauma combined. So I don't know, okay? Maybe Garvey's just there more because it's just like at this point my mental health has gotten to the point where he's basically a visual representation of my damage. But either way, it's terrifying. And finally, in at number 1, The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones novel starts a year after The Silver Eyes ended with Charlie in university. However, one day, Clay Burke comes to see Charlie and for some reason brings her to see a corpse with familiar wounds. This could be either because she would recognize them or because she was working with the police or because they just had to advance the plot. I don't know. I haven't read the original novels and at this point I don't really want to. However, looking at the wounds, she can confirm that they are in fact from a springlock failure despite some not having any actual experience with forensics. But that means that we do have an unnamed springlock victim in the Twisted Ones novel. And if this character does have a name, please let me know in the comments because I can't find one online. However, I also had to kind of rush to get this list, so maybe I didn't look enough. Who knows? It might have been William, it might not have been, I don't know. And there was also fake blood, and they realized that Afton faked everything so that he couldn't be caught as a serial killer. I don't know, okay? It's stupid. William needs to die. Stop bringing him back. This is like a show like Criminal Minds, bringing a serial killer back after giving him a lethal injection for the 4th time. Okay, I don't get it. Stop doing it. In at 10, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now, okay? Everything was going well at first. They couldn't pin him down and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make him truly immortal. So, in an effort to study it further, William lures the possessed animatronics to a back room that they can't normally access and then uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims that he claimed so long ago. And seeing these victims causes William to panic. Understandably, I mean, they're freaking ghost kids and they're also the ghosts of kids that you killed. So, yeah, then this absolute animatronic genius, the technician that has made the suits, handles the suit maintenance, and explained to every employee the proper procedure for putting these springlock suits on, climbs into the Spring Bonnie suit that he actually uses to kill, and then climbs inside in such a panic that he actually didn't notice the moisture in the room, the leaking ceiling, and, you know, literally everything else, probably also his sweat, which caused the springlocks that were active in this moment, since it was in suit mode, to fail. And I feel like that moment is one of the most confusing mysteries. Why did he do that? He knows better. If he can avoid the cops for that long, why did he think that this was all just gonna be fine? Dude. And it's 7, Fredtrap. Fredtrap is exactly what you'd expect. It's Springtrap on a yellow Freddy animatronic, okay? The designs are actually scarier than normal Springtrap to me, and I guess maybe it's because bears are scarier than bunnies in general. I think that Scott made William use the Spring Bonnie suit because of how Scott himself was scared of Bonnie, but that's just idle speculation. I also think that originally William was planning on using the Fredbear suit, hence its superpowered jaw, but after Crying Child bit the dust, pun intended, he decided to use the Bonnie suit instead, since, you know, thanks to Elizabeth, he knew that Crying Child might be possessing Fredbear. But he wasn't, okay, and that's also idle speculation. But anyways, it's speculation from a DM who tells stories and knows how to story build, so maybe I'm onto something here. But anyway, there are still more rundown versions of also scrap versions of Fredtrap, which are already terrifying. And at 6, William Afton again. I say again, even though technically Burntrap was on the list already, but also some may not consider that the same thing. But what I mean is, in the context of this number, it makes sense, okay? Could William have suffered a springlock failure before getting trapped in the Spring Bonnie suits like we see in FNAF 3? You know what? It's possible. And it explains why I said again. It certainly appears that way in the FNAF novels, because William is described as having scars that are consistent with the spring lock failure before becoming Springtrap in the books. So, could it have happened in the games? I doubt it. The reason we think it could be possible is because we hear of an incident at a sister location that has multiple and simultaneous spring lock failures, so maybe that could have been William, okay? There are plenty of people that it could have been, but William having to deal with it would definitely get them put out of commission, at least for a time. But then, considering how he kept using the suit afterwards, I doubt it, because, you know, trauma, but again, he's a psychopath, so. Halfway through into number 5, Grim Chica. The first Springlock victim in the Final Nights series, Grim Chica is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3, Nightmares Awoken. Unlike the others, she's not a Reaper animatronic, which is a good thing because Jesus Christ, those things are horrifying. But Grim Chica holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit posters in the Night 3 cutscenes, but her faceplates are very hard to spot, and she's almost entirely purple. Purple, you know that, you know purple! The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse, because of course it does. She lacks a bib. She's very slim, like Toy Chica, luckily, except for the hips, which appear to be much wider because, you know, she's got to give birth to those dummy thick Chica babies. And it's also revealed that Grim Chica is a Springlock in the museum level, saying, quote, a victim of a Springlock failure forever forced to haunt the suit she was wearing. I don't get it, man. Like, why? Why would you do this to Chica? I put this on the list instead of Grim Freddy because, well, I mean, like, it's Chica, okay? And look at what they did to my girl. Okay, well look at how they massacred my girl Chica. Alright, it's rude. In at 4, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims, and this comes to us after FNAF 3's phone guide dialogue that mentions multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, instead of multiple Springlock mechanisms within one suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean either multiple of the Springlocks inside one suit failing at the same time, or more than one Springlock suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the Shadow Animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these are versions of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics who do have Springlock suits, but I'm pretty sure this was disproven by Scott at some point, or at least he mentioned that it was wrong. Sorry, there are also multiple holes with the theory, but anyways, Shadow Animatronics still pretty cool. Getting close to the end, in number 3, Golden Fredbear. One theory I've seen plenty of times, and I'm pretty sure was mostly the start of FNAF 4 theory, was that Golden Freddy and Fredbear are the same animatronic, suggesting that the reason Golden Freddy is all limp in the original FNAF and FNAF 2 is because his endoskeleton was removed after Crying Child's bite in 1983, and that's why the suit has to teleport around and cause hallucinations, because it can't actually move. This would also probably mean that Crying Child was the one in the Golden Freddy suit. However, we know that this isn't true based on the characters being separate in Ultimate Custom Night and not just coloring and size, since Golden Freddy is much smaller than Fredbear would have been, since, you know, Fredbear would have to accommodate a human and Golden Freddy wouldn't, since he would just be an animatronic and not a Springlock suit. But honestly, at this point, the actual design doesn't really seem to matter, since Springtrap went to Scrap Trap and then to Burn Trap, so honestly, it's all up in the air. However, I have yet to see proper substantial evidence of this being the case, and I don't think that they would have removed the endoskeleton before that. But ultimately, in number 2, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims, and this comes to us after the FNAF 3 phone guide dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is being used to describe the suit as a whole and not the actual individual mechanisms that make up the suit. So, the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or just multiple suits failing. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suit, which is where the Shadow Animatronics come from. This is supported by the fact that these are both shadows of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions. I mean, there are some holes in this theory, because, you know, one of them looks like Toy Bonnie, and Toy Bonnie's not a Springlock suit, but there is potential that this is the case, because again, designs, consistency doesn't really seem to matter anymore. And finally, in at number 1, Double Trouble. Could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the Springlock Bonnie suit that we see in FNAF 3? It is possible, okay, and it certainly appears like this could be the case in the FNAF novels. Well, it is the case in the FNAF novels, but because of that, it could be the case in the games. Since William in the books is described to have scars that are consistent with the Springlock failure before actually becoming Springtrap in the books. So, could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason that the Springlock suits were actually retired? Since we do hear of the unfortunate incident at a sister location, so is that unfortunate incident instead William? There are plenty of people that it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, because you know, he's kind of up there, and I mean, he doesn't really seem to care about anyone else, so if they failed on them, why would he retire them? But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on after, you know, when like the room was wet in FNAF 3, this could be unlikely unless he just doesn't have the capacity for trauma, but it's still possible either way, okay? So since this list is about mysteries, I feel like this deserves to be on it. And you know what? Be the capstone. And a 10-second times the charm. Could William have suffered a spring lock failure before getting trapped in the spring Bonnie suit like we see happen in FNAF 3? In a way, it's possible, and it appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described as having scars that are consistent with a spring lock failure before becoming Springtrap in the books. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the spring lock suits were retired in the first place, since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location? So is that unfortunate incident actually William? There are plenty of other people that it could be as well, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission, at least for a time. But with William continuing to use the suits afterwards and putting it on like we hear in FNAF 3, and then again he ends up failing in FNAF 3 as well, it's unlikely, so no. And at 8, Elizabeth Afton. I've seen a few people asking if or assuming that Elizabeth Afton was a victim of a spring lock failure, and the truth is, she wasn't. The circus baby animatronic isn't a spring lock suit, since a spring lock suit in this case is defined as a suit that contains robotic parts, but uses a special mechanism that when cranked moves those robotic parts to the side so that a person can climb inside and wear the robot like a suit. The baby animatronic isn't one of those, because there's no way to actually wear this animatronic. Baby it's just a robot, so there is no way that she could have spring locked Elizabeth. Elizabeth is just a normal victim of her father's killing spree, which resulted in her somehow wanting to make him proud, despite him being the reason she's dead. Directly. Like, not even an, he just because he made the animatronic thing. No. Nobody else had a hand in her death aside from him. But she still wants to make him proud. I don't know, I guess baby crushed her body and then her sanity too. Which, I mean, I'd understand. That's pretty rough. And at 6, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all time, okay? We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4, with the sounds of multiple animatronics banging at his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know that he dies, but other than that, it's all speculation. One of the theories is that the animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a painful death, especially since at this point the springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of events for the springlock suits is a little messy, since we don't really have the exact years for the things getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one, or maybe he tried to use it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton, and Scott just doesn't want us to know that yet or something, and what we hear could just be the FNAF 3 cutscene. I mean, I doubt it, but it would be absolutely hilarious if he ended up pulling that on us, okay? And for all those saying that Phone Guy can't be Afton because Afton is British or whatever, so is Tom Holland, okay? It's called acting. You can fake an accent, especially if you're a serial killer who's trying to evade everything, you know? Kinda, yeah, it's a thing. In at 4, the Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that was, is actually a victim of a springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no real harmful tendencies before this, so a springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a springlock failure would definitely provide enough power to do that, since, you know, the springlocks themselves would snap with a ferocious velocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to actually crush a skull thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics ended up getting suspended, because now one of their own employees was bit, and then they had to promote him and then fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So yeah, was the Bite of 87 a springlock failure? Maybe. And was it the moment that caused the springlock suits to be retired? I don't know. Okay, it also could have been the FNAF 4 bite. But considering the FNAF 3 phone calls, it actually seems to be this bite though, since in FNAF 2 we hear about someone using one of the yellow suits and not mentioning the spring locks until FNAF 3, meaning that they were probably still in use normally come 1985, and Crying Child died in 1983, so it was probably the Bite of 87 that got them suspended, so there you go. Getting close to the end of number 3, not beefed up. The fact that these animatronics are incredibly powerful is absolutely an insane thing that nobody really seems to grasp. Like the fact that Fredbear was able to crush a child's skull, something that we've covered how crazy is. Imagine if that was an employee, okay? Like ignoring the fact that you think it's a spring lock incident or that it's a spring lock suit, the amount of power that jaw has is a hazard for everyone who comes into contact with it. Like goddamn. And before you say anything, okay, it wasn't a spring lock failure. I don't know how many times I need to go over that. There's no spring locks in the mouth, and they weren't active at the time. Okay? It can't be a spring lock failure. So these animatronics are just insanely powerful animatronics, alright? Which would be explained by them being intended to kill, which also explains why it would have the power to crush crying child's skull. The way I see it, William probably wanted to use the Fredbear suit as his kill suit because, you know, Freddy's the more popular character, but then he had to change to Bonnie after, you know, his son was killed in the suit, especially considering how he saw Elizabeth end up possessing Baby, so he was probably worried that Crying Child did the same with Fredbear, so yeah, that's the way I see it. But ultimately, in number 2, spring locks are real. Okay, you see, if I was to actually do like a cosplay of the purple guy and actually do it without it being a joke, I'd probably end up using a purple phone case, because, you know, I gotta reference the phone guy. But I don't need a spring lock crank, because those aren't actually a thing in real life. While the term spring lock is used in real life, it is a totally different mechanism from the actual FNAF thing, okay? I'm certain most of you got the whole spring locks are real line from the Spring Locks in You How Not to Die Remastered thread on the FNAF wiki. However, actual spring locks are just locks that use springs. From my research, what I gathered was that a spring lock in real life is in the simplest of terms if your front door's deadbolt was on a spring. Every other instance talking about real spring locks just simply brings you back to that page or quotes that page, so there's really only one source. Spring locks, as they're used in the games, do not exist in real life. Alright, that is a myth. The term is used, but it's 2 separate words instead of one, and they mean totally different things. So please stop.